Hi, this is Doug Ward from Tech Britain. I'm here with the head of MDDA, Dave Carter. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, no problem.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers. Yeah, good to see you.
Dave, can we speak about your background to start with?
Yeah, well, basically we come out of the economic development service of the city. I mean, in the late 80s, Manchester was in a really bad way. And the then leader of the council got together people from sort of business, from the universities, from community organisations to come up with a sort of strategy. Where would Manchester be in 10 or 12 years' time at the end of the 1990s? And three things came out of that. One was to do things with the universities more effectively, and that led to the science park being built. The second one was around creative industries, which was then just thought of as a leisure activity, you know, it wasn't seen as something very serious. And the third one, which I was involved in, was that the internet would be commercialised. And so even though some consultants were even then saying, not for 10 years, we didn't believe them. And we worked very closely with some of the internet pioneers at the university who were seeing business opportunities, even though they were academics, to have within the Economic Development Department a group of people working on innovation and technology. And that ran from the late 80s right through to us hosting the Commonwealth Games in 2002. And that included launching the UK's very first public access email bulletin board conferencing system with an organisation called PopTel in '91. So we had email addresses here in the city from the late 90s, and we had, you know, wide scale community email access at least from the early 90s. So perhaps we were a little bit better prepared for the commercialisation of the internet. And then after the Commonwealth Games, as you can imagine, we really reorganised the city quite substantially, and we decided to take the innovation and technology team out of economic development and have it as a bit of a separate arm's length agency. So that's when we established the Manchester Digital Development Agency. And we work really on three things. We work on digital industries, so we work very closely with the Trade Association, Manchester Digital, and other business networks. We work on digital inclusion, which means we work with community and with not-for-profit bodies to make sure that everyone can benefit from connectivity and internet services. And we work on digital innovation, which means we have a thing called the Manchester Living Lab, where we actively go out and promote research and development in internet technologies, all sorts of things from Internet of Things to cloud to open data, and in those areas. And that's really where we are today.
Good stuff. It's good to know. In terms of your thoughts on Manchester's tech community, Dave, where do you think we're at today?
I think we're in quite a strong position. Obviously, a number of companies and the ability of startups has been affected by the economic crisis and the lack of funding from the banks and venture funds. No doubt about that. But what Manchester's got going for it is it was one of the few places outside of London that right back in the early 90s, because it had the only internet exchange at that time outside of London, it meant that there was a cluster, quite a strong cluster of very early internet commercial activity here. That the strength of that meant, and the fact that also there were a number of companies that diversified. Manchester's always had a really strong base in publishing, in media, and so there were people setting up internet companies who were from graphic design, from film, television, from publishing. And when the boom and bust came for the whole .com period, I think the digital companies in Manchester were a little bit more resilient. You know, some of them went to the Warsaw, but maybe not as many as you thought. And in the recovery afterwards, again, I think there were more startups happening in Manchester than anywhere else in the country, again, with that caveat, outside of London. Mm-hmm. So now I think you've got a very good digital sector in terms of the scale of it. I think it's big, I think it's dynamic, but also the scope is very diverse. You've got really hard tech companies, you know, internet service providers, hosting companies, you know, the whole data center area, right through to very, very creative sort of design companies, and in the middle, you know, software, web marketing, you know, SEO. So, I mean, that's why I think it's so resilient. The scale being good, but also the scope and the diversity being very strong.
In terms of the government's role to play in all this, Dave, what do you think their role is in terms of helping the tech community?
I mean, I think for us, I mean, it has been about sort of business finance, which is, I have to say, not particularly wonderful at the moment, in spite of many attempts to do it. I mean, banks still aren't lending enough. Venture capital provision is still very short term. So, I mean, the usual joke goes, it's a lot easier to borrow £1 million than it is for 10,000 to sustain a startup. And so a lot of startups still have to rely on friends, family, different ways of doing things. But I think, you know, when you say government, I think we would naturally differentiate between national government role,
Sure.
which is in a positive sense to really stimulate demand, stimulate finance and investment. And I suppose our criticism would be, and including outside of London, because what we've seen of government so far is that everything is obsessed with certain roundabouts in the East End, and maybe not even other parts of the M25, yet alone up here. But then on the other hand, government is both national and local government. And so from a local government point of view, you know, Manchester has the size and scale where even with very limited funding, because of the economic crisis in particular, we can do things, which is not about giving money, you know, we're not an alternative to the banks, we don't give money to business startups, but we can certainly create an environment where business startups like to be, you know, it's a pleasant place to be, there are great networks, there are great startup networks like the new one on Facebook that Martin Bryant and his colleagues have helped to set up. There's creative spaces like the Manchester Digital Lab, Mad Lab in the Northern Quarter. And so there's a great crossover. I mean, there's no need as a student to feel you've got to move away from the city to do creative, technical things which may include startups. It may just include being part of the back room and part of the kind of geek community to work around hack spaces and so on.
Sure.
And then the final thing I mentioned, which I know you want to come back to, is co-working. I think there's a very broad range of co-working spaces and opportunities here to create new ones. And again, I'm not so sure that's the case in other cities in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair comment. We've obviously been around the UK, and I think the government have clocked on that tech cities a start. I think that's one thing that wasn't communicated too strongly, and they don't have as big a team as the press suggests. And there were other people, quite rightly, inside the M25 who were saying, you know, where's our kind of press coverage and stuff like that. And I, from being at the ground level there, it seems to be they're onto that, but I definitely agree that it needs to now expand across the UK, because there's some great things going on all across the UK, and Manchester quite rightly has a big shout to say, look at me, what are you going to do now for us? What do you think in terms of long term, David? Do you think we can be producing the next big international tech companies have? What do you think needs to happen in order to make that happen?
Well, I think first of all we've got to carry through the revolution in education and training. So, you know, we're working very closely with people like Nesta and locally with Mad Lab to get, you know, new approaches to coding in schools, get Raspberry Pi into schools, get people linking those technical skills to entrepreneurial skills, do the same with universities. Through Manchester Digital we had a skills summit in February which brought together employers in the city and colleges and schools, and the day after we had a student awareness day where students could come down and meet particularly the smaller diverse tech companies that we have in the city, and we planned to get 200 or 300 students through, and if we'd have got 500 we'd have been over the moon, and we got nearly 1,000, and you just couldn't move. I mean, some students waited for 5 or 6 hours to have, you know, face-to-face meetings with some of Manchester's, you know, tech companies and tech community. And that really inspired us to think, well, that needs to be an annual thing from now on, where, you know, there shouldn't be any student with an interest in this area who is sat there at any time thinking, what a pity I can't do it in Manchester, because they can. You know, they can get a job with a part of the dynamic tech sector, they can be involved in helping get a startup together. You know, there's a lot of opportunities for those skills to be transferred into business, and there's a lot of opportunities for business to benefit from those skills. I mean, they're not there at the moment. I mean, that is true. So a lot of those students coming out are not business ready necessarily. But you could imagine that what needs to happen in the next few years is if you transformed the kind of curricula in schools and colleges, if you transformed the awareness levels that particularly young people were able to have here, and if you were able to transform the way that businesses thought slightly longer term, because at the moment they'll go, oh my God, I need a coder, and if they're not ready in 6 weeks of training them, I'm stuffed. But maybe if there were ways at which they could bring in students a couple of days a week and link them in so that when they then finish, they're ready to just do 6 days and get going on the business side, then I think those are the kind of things we need to be promoting.
Dave, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Great, no worries. You know where we are. We'll just come back and ask us anything else.
What is the best way to get in touch, Dave?
Just my direct email. I mean,
just get on the website. You get in touch. And
yeah, or just email me personally. That's a bit better.
Fantastic.
Read that. Yeah. The website is all, and we're relaunching the website in September, so there'll be a lot more relevant information on it then. Great. Good to see you.
Thank you.